Cheese to meet you. It's Itti. Today, I want to talk about Ritual Summon. Oh no, the text is in Japanese by default. I require a Ritual Summon is a Metroidvania game with a focus on melee combat. At any time the player has the ability to switch between two weapons, a long sword, and the good one. What you are seeing now is a mostly unedited, sped up version of my most recent playthrough of the first major room of the game. I would have had a fresh, blind playthrough, but OBS refused to pick it up initially. Even if this is only the first room, it seems a little weird just how little I had to censor a game whose Steam tags look like this. Wow. This sure is taking a long time. I set the speed of this clip to 600% and it was still over a minute long. It's at 800% now and it just keeps going. I didn't even get to censor something at the appropriate time. I originally wanted to show footage up to the first boss, but it turns out that I would have had to speed it up so much that the character was basically teleporting around. It's still going okay, I'm just gonna go to the next part. This game is pornographic in nature. Or at least it's supposed to be. I mean, sure, Hella's outfit is comical in how much it tries to emphasize her girly bits, but it isn't actually that much worse than what I've seen women wear in games like Soul Calibur or Star Fox Adventures. Most of the time it doesn't even look like a pornographic game. Just a mediocre Metroidvania with an overly sexualized protagonist. That sounded harsher than I intended, but come on. Nothing's happening. In the game's defense, nothing's happening because in order to see the content the tags are talking about, we have to lose. If an enemy grabs you while you're knocked down, you get an H scene. The game is light on difficulty, which is fine. The game isn't trying to be challenging, it's trying to be sexy. On the upside, this means that you can easily avoid seeing things you don't want to see. On the downside, it means the things you do want to see can't really happen naturally. You basically have to lose on purpose to see the H scenes you want. I also find it interesting that, for the first time that I've seen for this genre, getting in an H scene doesn't damage you. During an H scene, you take no damage from the H scene itself, all enemies will ignore you, and you'll be immune to all other damage while it's active. Weirdly though, time still moves during an H scene. So if you need to recharge stamina or MP, you can take a dive, purposefully get in an H scene, then just wait for those things to recharge to full, without worry. Despite the light difficulty, the late game enemies have a lot of health. It's still not difficult, but it takes a really long time and gets tedious after a while. At least, it does if you, like me, just kinda forget about the immolation ability. The pearls you collect from defeated enemies can be immolated in the starting area to increase your stats. Which stats they increase, however, are random. Despite that, the stat increases from immolation are ridiculously powerful, to the point that they render the potions you can find nearly useless as a collectible. The weird thing is, you can only do this at the goddess statue in the starting area. All of the other goddess statues are exactly the same, allowing you to save or fast travel. But immolation is, for some reason, reserved to this one statue. You can teleport from any statue to any other statue, including this one, so all this limitation does is add on an extra loading screen. The moment I rediscovered this mechanic, any difficulty the game previously had, imploded on the spot. And I'd argue that wasn't a bad thing. It made the threat even less threatening from a narrative perspective, but at least fights ended faster. Now the game incentivizing failure by locking H scenes behind losing is one thing. I kind of have a problem with it gameplay-wise, but I completely understand the appeal. Oops, I accidentally fell into the tentacle pit, and great times were had by all. But the game uses another H game trope. One that I can't stand no matter how I try to look at it. Sex and perversion are used within the game's narrative to highlight hypocrisy, corruption, and evil. Endless sex is the villain's stated goal. The game itself seems to have such a negative opinion of sex, despite the genre, that I was just never in the mood. I went through my entire blind playthrough without seeing a single H scene. But hey, after the story was all said and done, wait no, I wasn't done reading that. After the story was all said and done, I could ignore it and get all the H scenes I want. And, well, this is my gallery. As you can see, or rather can't see, so take my word for it, it's incomplete. That's not because I couldn't get those scenes, it's because I didn't want to. All of the men in this game suck. I don't get it. I do not get it. What even is the appeal of ugly guys? Who was the fuck that decided that this is what goblins look like? Thanks, I hate it. At least there's these slug things. That'll get me my monster fucker fix. And just look at how many there are. You're watching a review of a hentai game you don't get to judge. There are 9 available enemies, including the bosses, all with 2 to 3 scenes each, but I only really like 3 of them. It was almost 4, but that looks really painful. And at that point I have to say this game isn't exactly worth the price, costing $11 by default. The game is more expensive than Undertale, for a fraction of the content. There's just not enough game here for the price. And no, I don't think that it being pornographic justifies the price either. I didn't even bother with most of what the game had on offer, and for the stuff I did like, I can just look up Insect Forced or larger intersex on the blue site for essentially free. My blind playthrough ran me about an hour and a half, but the game annoyingly forces you to play the entire thing a second time to see all the content. Hard mode isn't unlocked until you beat normal mode at least once, and beating hard mode is the only way to see the true final boss and true ending, artificially adding an extra hour of playtime on average. Just barely pushing the average playtime above the threshold for getting a refund. But alas, I must confess, I did not want my brothers knowing I was playing the game for what I hope are obvious reasons. So I may have gotten it by sailing the 7 seas.
Loser!
Please forgive my sin of piracy. My other sins are fine where they are. The least I can do to make up for it is attempt to inform the developers here that their anti-piracy measure didn't work. At least, I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be an anti-piracy measure. So, if you run out of HP, the screen fades to white, and it's supposed to take you to a unique game over screen depending on what dealt the final blow, but the game just crashed instead. However, when I booted the game back up, I unlocked the ability to view the game over screens anyway. So, they tried to have an anti-piracy measure, but all it did was slightly inconvenience me.
Skip it up and down up.
I realize I've gotten this far without really touching on the story. I don't like it. I've already gone over the way it handles its sexual content, but also, the translation is super not great, which may be making the story seem worse than it is. There's a cavalcade of translation mishaps from the start of the game to the end. Pella is misgendered early on. The game can't decide if Pella's name is spelt with 1 L, 2 L's, or an R. The warp locations are bizarrely titled or cut off. At one point Pella's laugh is transcribed as a string of W's, which makes it seem like she said LOL out loud. At the start of the game, Pella says she'd rather be watching animates. I assume she means anime. And my personal favorite.
Aha! I overheard you and found out you're from another world. Curses. She must know I'm from another world.
This isn't the first time I've seen this sort of thing in Japanese media, so I have to assume there's some nuance to the language I'm unaware of that when translated literally, results in this nonsense phrase. As funny as they can get, there's a particularly egregious one when rescuing a blue maiden in the game's second half where Pella says that she'll put them down? The phrase you're looking for is let down, at least I hope to God. Put down, over here in the West, means euthanize. Notice that when you interact with a maiden that they vanish and leave behind pearls for you to collect. If this phrasing wasn't a mistake, then this is really, really gross. It's difficult for me to tell if I actually have a problem with the plot, or if it's just more translation errors. Spoilers for both endings I guess, and here goes nothing. Pella is an up-and-coming idol from real-world Japan who was summoned to an alternate world to act as a mortal avatar for the Holy White Maiden. Why is Pella an amateur idol from real-world Japan? What does that add to the plot? If she's from real-world Japan, why does her world apparently have goblins? Lux is the only other major character in the game, sort of. She acts as Pella's rival, except not really. She's a walking archetype. Well-meaning but incompetent, so incompetent in fact, that the game seems to be trying to use her as comic relief. Through non-con? If this is comic relief, then it is ill-timed, and tasteless given the tone of the game. She also repeatedly makes vulgar threats and insults towards Pella, but somehow doesn't know what a masturbator is. How does Pella already know Lux? How long has she been here? Why is Lux finding out that Pearl is from another world such a huge discovery for her, and such a problem for Pella? Isn't that common knowledge? The Holy Church is clearly corrupt, but the plot never does anything with that. The game has two endings, one for normal mode, and one for hard mode. You would think with how important the Demon Maiden is that she'd have literally any dialogue, like even one line, but no, she shows up on hard mode, then it's fight time. In normal mode it's left a bit ambiguous, but in the hard mode ending the cult of lust is completely eradicated, meaning there's no need to summon an avatar for the Holy Maiden again. This strikes me as a little silly. These faiths have been competing for centuries, then Pella shows up by accident and completely wipes the cult out of it in less than 24 hours because she wants to go home and watch anime? Lol, in the normal ending, Pella vanishes from the world, I guess back to her own world, but the ending text talks about how much everyone hates her. Lux is given the credit for Pella's victory over the Church of Lust. In the hard ending, Pella returns to the Holy Church, and is praised to the point of parody for her victory. Then she vanishes from this world anyway. Thankfully before the head of the church can fill her with his unsubtle, holy light, blah. Really thought you were clever for that one, game. No closure whatsoever is given to Lux in this ending. Pella herself goes through no character arc. She's never humbled. She never learns humility, or to care for others. She remains the same stroppy bitch from the beginning of the game to the end. She's annoying. It's almost like the game wants us to hate her. And I left the game feeling quite unsatisfied. I'd say no pun intended, but that seems to be a recurring theme here, and that is that. Roll credits. Well, there's one last thing I think's worth pointing out. Because H scenes are completely optional, this can lead to an inconsequential, but really funny plot hole where Pella somehow knows the Demon Maiden has a cock without ever seeing it.
聖なる光なんかより魔女のチンポに注がれたいわ。
Well, I certainly can't argue with that. Well, I've said my piece, so it's time for me to go. Yay. I mean, oops. I'm surrounded. And my weapon is all the way over there. I wonder what will happen.